Well, there's been a lot of interest in the Medibank Private float on this station and among our listeners, and there are a couple of reasons for that. The philosophy, I guess, that underpins the move is in part, but also I imagine there are a lot of curious people out there wondering about the potential to invest in what will be a newly private entity. The government today has put out a prospectus with some interesting information. Just to put you in the picture, the federal government has put a $1.55 to $2 per share price range on the Medibank Private float. It's expected to begin trading on the 5th of December, which is suddenly becoming a pretty busy start of the month, isn't it, with that and the two by-elections on the Saturday. We learned about that in breaking news this afternoon as well. Finance Minister Matthias Cormann has also announced a $2 price cap for retail investors buying up to $250,000 worth of shares. So whilst there is an indicative price, they are capping it for people that aren't buying from the big end of town at $2. Obviously, the indicative price range just means that that's where it will start, and it's likely to move around thereafter. The government is aiming to raise somewhere in the order of $4.5 to $5 billion from the sale. When the now Prime Minister Tony Abbott was Federal Health Minister, Terry Barnes was part of the leadership team that attempted to get the sale off the ground for the first time, and we speak to Terry on a whole host of social policy matters, and he's been kind enough to give us some of his time again today. G'day, Terry.
Hello, Will.
Can we start this discussion by restating the case for sale, just for those people that are wondering how we got to this point?
Well, I think the bottom line here, Will, is that the government is actually the regulator of the private health insurance industry, of which Medibank is the market leader. It has 30% of all private health insurance. And when you're owning a health fund and regulating the industry in which it operates, you've got a slight conflict of interest. So it's actually in the public interest to have the government sell that off and actually let Medibank trade as a completely independent company. And that's really what it's all about. And, of course, really, it's not the sort of business that government should be doing, private health insurance. That is a commercial area. So I think by letting Medibank go, the government is actually improving the private health insurance industry, but it's actually giving mum and dad investors as well as institutional investors a chance to share in its profitability and long-term success.
You've probably been leafing through the prospectus, or at least seen some of the detail come out today. Does it differ much from what was planned 8-9 years ago?
I think it's very similar. Back in the Howard government days, we looked at roughly $4 to $5 billion in those days as well. I think Matthias Cormann has estimated that they would raise $5.5 billion if the shares are valued at $2 for those capped retail shares. So they're obviously pretty confident, given that the number $4 billion was the one that was being floated about the most recently. So my sense is that they're pretty confident overall in that they've got the numbers right. If I could put it this way, I don't think that Matthias Cormann is being an economic girly man when it comes to getting his figures correct. But I think it's a good balance between being at the conservative end and being too bold. And I think that can only mean that the chances of a good IPO of a public float are pretty good.
When this issue was first canvassed on this program, and indeed on this station a little bit earlier this year, the concern primarily from people that had concerns was that it would result in premiums going up. In South Australia, we have some less than celebrated examples of where a previous government monopoly has been solved into a private monopoly, and it hasn't exactly meant that prices have gone down, and people were concerned that there might be that phenomena here. Can you allay those concerns?
I think I'd like to think I can, because basically Medibank Private is one of the 37-odd health insurers around the country. It is operating in a pretty vibrant commercial market. It has to compete for members on the basis of having good policies, but also on the basis of having good prices, being most affordable. And it's going to be the market that's going to dictate Medibank's prices, and that really is where it comes down to. I mean, the government is not regulating it, or is regulating it, but is not running it in the way that it is now. So my sense is it will be leaner, meaner, more efficient. It has to be if it's going to survive as a public company.
$4.5 to $5.5 billion. You happy with that valuation?
Well, as I said, I think $5.5 billion is actually a bit more bold than the markets and the analysts were predicting. So that tells me that the government has identified quite a lot of interest in the float, not just from mum and dad investors, but from institutional investors as well. And I would say that by capping the price at $2, the government is actually very confident it's going to get that price.
What's next, Terry? I mean, is there something obvious that comes along next? And I'm thinking in the world of health, as it were, that could well be floated and provided privately to benefit Australians?
Well, I think by removing Medibank Private from public ownership, that is probably the big elephant in the room that's been there for quite a long time.
Right.
So I think there are no real, at least at the federal government level, state is another issue. I think there are areas such as medical, sort of hospital-related services, and in some states, aged care can be privatised. But at federal level, I think basically this is the big health asset that's left, and the sooner it's off the books, the better. But the one thing I would say just quickly is I think that what the government can do to make private health insurance much more attractive and affordable to to consumers as a whole, and not just members of Medibank Private, is that they can reform the industry in terms of how it's regulated. It's very heavily regulated in terms of what it can and can't cover, the way that prices and premiums are set, which basically require the federal health minister to sign off on them, things like that, just to actually make the whole private health industry less a cottage industry and much more commercial. And I think over time that would add value to the shares of Medibank Private as well.
Terry, excuse me, if you will, a question without notice. There's a topic that we're going to canvass on the program tomorrow that you may have some insights into, and it's the AMA's concerns that it's raised with regard to the proliferation of services now available in pharmacies. And we're talking about everything from immunisations to tests for celiacs to, over the weekend, a lot of kerfuffle about skin cancer diagnosis happening in pharmacies. The AMA say that this is not the right place to get this kind of stuff done. It seems to me to be a reaction to a market now where people are or not wanting to go to a GP and dedicate half a day to getting some of these things done, and technology might well have progressed. Have you got a view on that debate?
Well, funnily enough, I do, and it was without notice, so that's true. But you might remember last time we spoke a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the location and ownership of pharmacies.
That's right,
I think there are some real rorts. But when it comes to professional services, I think that the pharmacy profession is actually on a winner here, provided that they conduct health checks and support services in a responsible way, and that doctors are not shut out of the process, like as the old ads used to say, when pain persists, see your doctor. I think that's perfectly reasonable. And when you think about it, we're not talking about high-level medical diagnoses. We're talking about low-level health checks under clear protocols, clear discipline, so that nobody is actually, nobody should be in a position where they're given dud advice and certainly precluded from going to a doctor. And I just think it's another case of the AMA wanting to keep the shop as closed as possible and protect its privileges from basically the 21st century.
I thought you might have a thought on that. Terry, thank you very much for your time again, mate. It's always interesting getting your insights.
No worries, Will. Thanks for your time.
That's a social policy analyst, Terry Barnes, who